Unearthly Litanies of Despair is the second full-length album from Engulfed. This is a Turkish death metal band, and we don't need to qualify that with anything else. This is a pure death metal band. You could suggest they're Blackened influence as I've seen, but I really don't think that applies at all to what they're doing. I think when people hear melody and guitar melody in fairly brutal death metal, they assume that there's maybe a Blackened component, but really this is in the tradition of death metal entirely, and it comes from members, musicians who are very well known for this style from different points of view, be it Hyperdontia or Diabolizer. We do get that. Here's a bit of what Incantation does best. Here's a bit of what Morbid Angel did best on one of their tangents, and they build from that point by adding different melodic aspects beyond those exaggerations of style. So if you appreciate what Diabolizer did with their debut, I think that you'll instantly understand what this record is all about, but see that there's some depth to it as you push through the record and find their songwriting has a bit more severe nuance to it. There's, again, a little bit more melody attached to it, and Engulfed have built their own identity over several releases, which was maybe a bit more atmospheric and maybe leaning towards a more doomed stroke on Engulfed in Obscurity, their 2017 debut LP, and now they've broken out of that haze, and now this is a much more brutal and engaging record that just hits from the start. And I think part of that means that they just have to shed some of the complexities that had arrived, the more contrived and involved guitar orchestrations of their Vengeance of the Fallen EP back in 2020. This might seem like a loss, but I think once you hear this preview song and we kind of get into the meat of this record, you see it was a fair trade, and it makes for a much more listenable full-length album. So, of course, adding a second guitarist to the mix brings many more possibilities to the construction of this album, and I think it made a lot of sense to add the former guitarist for Next Carnus and also current Burial Invocation guitarist Can as reinforcement for what the main songwriter brings to this band, and it's allowed some of the complexity of the previous EP to really sing on this record, especially up front, some of the more complex and immediate pieces. When we get into the groovier, Immolation-esque side of the band, we definitely feel Engulfed come into their own and speak for themselves a little bit more. There are going to be some moments where, like, that is obviously a riff that is inspired by Covenant-era Morbid Angel. Voidwalker's Dominion is one of the best songs on this album, and maybe because of that reference grabbed at me so quickly, there's plenty more moments on the album, plenty more riffs on the album that are likely to grab you and remind you that Engulfed they're kind of moving towards their own thing, which is now becoming more distinct from the more technical and abrupt movements of a band like Hyperdontia, which is also in their repertoire. So otherwise, yeah, this is a pretty straightforward death metal album in a lot of ways. It's a very classic feeling record. It's got this huge production sound, very brutal with the way the drums are approached. I think the drummer is just absolute class on this record. He just kills it all the way through. There's no real downside to what this record is doing. They just kind of kill it all the way through. Yeah, as a death metal fan, it's an exciting thing to pick up. I think it's been, I think maybe the last Scorphilia record kind of had this feeling to it where there's a lot of the really recognizable classic aspects of death metal in there. It's clear what they were influenced from moment to moment, but they still kind of make it their own. They make it an exciting record to listen to, and they just kind of blaze through this one. It's substantial, but it's just aggressive enough to be impressive every time I picked it up. So they hit a real sweet spot with this record. I thought I preferred the first one. The more time I spent with this one, it's just exceptional. For me, that's a very high recommendation. This is one of the better records of April. You can read my review for more in-depth thoughts on what makes this such a good, solid record in my written review. But otherwise, check it out. It releases tomorrow on April 19th.